Hi, my name is Matt Perez, and we're here in the rHatchery.live with David Marquet and Jose Leal, my partner. And in case you're wondering, and I don't care if you're not wondering, this is a guayabera. It's a formal top in very hot countries like Cuba, where I'm from, and Philippines, and all those things. David, I want to say a couple of things. I saw him back in 2009, I think it was, in World Blue, at World Blue event, and he was talking about what he did and what we hadn't done, etc. And I thought it was, man, that's kind of bullshit. And then I bought the book, and I read it twice. I never read a book twice. One, because they're badly written, or it's a boring story or whatever. I read it twice because he managed to do all he could possibly do, and maybe more, at inside a submarine. Which he's got the book, and it's called "Turn the Ship Around," and highly recommend it. We're going to talk about his new book, but highly recommend it because it really blows your mind, and it blew my mind. It was an inspiration for me. So, David, now we'll give you time to explain what you do and all that stuff, and what your what's come out after the book, the consulting company, etc. And then we'll have more of a conversation. So,
welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matt and Jose, for having me on your show, and welcome to all of the live participants. Thanks for sharing your incredibly valuable time with us. So, my story is I was really good at command and control leadership. I came up through the Navy. We were basically trained to be command and control. Not basically, we were trained to be command and control leaders. We were trained to give orders and get people to do stuff. And the framework of leadership was leaders make decisions and get the team to execute it. And when I go around the world now, I find that this, it's such a default framework that people don't even question it. And it's a framework which is, I don't think, really well aligned to human nature, because humans are not good at just doing what they're told. No one likes to just do what they're told. 2-year-olds don't like to do what they're told. Humans like agency, humans like creativity, humans like to think, humans like all these things, which this leadership model doesn't give. Now, it's great for the leader, because the leader gets all the juice. The leader gets the psychological benefit of saying, oh, yeah, I made the decision. But I said we did it, but I really knew it was my brain and their hands, and that's how it worked. Well, yeah, but it's not really human. Why do we have it? We have it because that's what worked in the industrial age. That's what worked when we took humans and we put them on assembly lines where variability was an enemy and we needed to make everything the same as possible. And it was this structure of language. We spend a lot of time on language. How did I get this? Well, I was a math and science geek in high school. I was growing up in the Cold War. I wanted to do my part. It was natural for me. Go in the submarines. Submarines hide from people. That was perfect for me. And I was a big introvert, way over here on the introvert scale. And I was good. I was a good submariner, and I knew my job, and I was good at the Navy's leadership model of telling people what to do. Now, I didn't always feel comfortable, because when I got told what to do, it was sort of like I chafed, and I felt, well, but there's more, and but I have a question, and why are we doing that same old way? And I can see a better way. Oh, no one really cared what I thought. In any event, I had an opportunity to rewrite the script. I was so good at telling people what to do. The Navy promoted me. They made me a submarine commander. I went to school for 12 months to learn the ship. At the very last minute, I didn't go to that ship, went to a different ship, the USS Santa Fe, because the captain there quit early.
David,
doing
I
so
wanted
good.
to jump in there, if I may. I
Yeah.
just want to ask you a couple of questions about your career before you became a commander.
Yeah.
How long did that take you, and what kind of roles did you have? And,
Yeah,
and
so
did you
that-
feel a difference between the amount of autonomy you had in those roles?
So the Navy's relatively structured, and the way it works is you alternate between you're physically on a submarine, taking the ship out to sea, repairing it when it comes back to port, and then you go to a staff job. So it's like 3 years on the submarine, 2 years on the staff job, 3 on the submarine, 2 on the staff. You alternate, and you're moving up the rungs of the submarine. So you start out, you're a division officer, then you become a department head, and then the second in command, then finally the captain. So your responsibility is growing as you move up this very sort of linear progression. And I will tell you that when I wasn't the captain, I tried to do things about empowering my team, and I failed. It was a miserable failure. And I can blame external situations like my boss didn't support me, yada, yada, yada. But a big part of the problem was me. I didn't really understand the ecosystem of, quote, empowerment. And even when I got to be the captain, where I could basically sort of take on whatever risk I wanted in terms of my own personal career, in terms of empowering my team, the phrase we might use is like I ran ahead of my headlights because I gave too much power away. And I thought as long as I kept giving power away, the team, the rest of the ecosystem would respond in an adaptive way, and people would make good decisions with the power that I was giving them. And I learned that giving power away has limits to it. And the two input variables, I think, to these limits are, one, what someone's technical competence is. So this makes total sense, and basically no one doesn't need to be explained to them. So if you're like a doctor, you've gone on this medical training, you can make decisions about how to do the operation, which, say, for example, someone who hasn't gone to medical school can't make, because you have the technical knowledge. The same thing with operating a nuclear submarine, running an investment bank, a hedge fund, writing code, whatever it is. That's pillar number one. Pillar number two, however, is understanding what we're trying to do, or why, our purpose, what our intent, what's our intent here? And so what I learned was that when you give the team intent, hey guys, here's the situation, here's what success looks like. Now you come back to me in 5 minutes, or in a day, or in 5 weeks, and tell me how you intend to achieve that. Now what you're doing is you get thinking. And one of the biggest things I learned is, as soon as you hand a ticket to someone and say, here, this is what I want you to do, it comes with a get out of jail. You don't need to think, and you don't need to take responsibility. Right. As soon as we start telling people what to do, we try and hold them, quote, accountable. But it feels false. There's a lot of people ask me about accountability. Says accountability is sort of like this. Okay, I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you the team you have to do it with. I'm going to tell you the deadline. I'm going to tell you what the quality standards are. And then I'm going to, quote, hold you accountable for not doing it. Well, that's bullshit. Like, I didn't get to make any decisions. So you can try and hold me accountable, but you're the one who controlled everything. Once you give people control, you don't need to hold them accountable. They hold themselves accountable because they're actually making the decisions. So I learned on the submarine the power language, and for us, the word intent was super powerful. I would try and give intent instead of instructions, although when I got stressed out, I fell back into old habits, and I would just tell them what to do, and then I would regret it. And then they would give me their intentions. They would not ask permission, but they would also not just do it. And when you hear organizations say, well, I'd rather get forgiveness than permission, that's because we say we're not playing with a full deck. We're not playing with the intent card. That gets you the best of both: thinking, ownership, initiative, but also a sense of control. Because when one of the officers comes to me and says, hey, tomorrow I intend to change the torpedo loadout, I got to ask questions and I got to say no. But all the initiative and the thinking comes from them. But they can only say that if they understand that tomorrow our mission is going to change from what we're doing now to something different that's going to require a different way of optimizing the torpedo tubes.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, because that
your boat went from being the worst in the Navy to being the best, or something like that, or?
Yeah. So the reason I went to the submarine that I wasn't trained for was because the previous captain quit because it was doing so badly. We had less than 10% of the sailors were signing up to stay in the Navy. Over the next 12 months, 100% did. Every sailor, 33 out of 33, had a chance to stay in the Navy, said yes. And we got evaluated with the highest score in the history of the Navy for operating the submarine. But the same people who were pretty broken before that. And we didn't fire anybody. And the reason was because we moved the needle on thinking. We changed the way we talk to each other so that thinking became easier to express. And I always had this picture in my head of like it was like a gas needle. Like what percent of the total organization, we have 135, 140 people, what percent of that brain power, 140 people times 100% of their brain, are we using right now? And most of the time, when I got there, it was like 2%, literally, because I felt, oh, I'm giving 100% because I'm the boss. I'm doing all the thinking. I'm making all the decisions. Well, if you're not making decisions, you're not using your brain that much. Now we would try, we would happy talk ourselves into saying, oh, but look at all this, like people doing yeah, but if you're not the final signature on an approval form, if you're not the final authority making a decision, you're not using 100% of your brain. I submit. You can phone it in because you really don't have the accountability. So once you do that, now the needle starts to move. Now people are using their brains. And then we did a bunch of other things. We changed the way we ask questions. For example, we got rid of some negative language and industrial age language. So here's some quick examples. Well, first of all, they, you get rid of the word they. High performing teams don't use the word they. They didn't change the batteries. Well, who's they? Oh, that guy right over there. No, we didn't change the batteries. That's how high performing teams talk, number one. Number two, people say, I hear this all the time. A leader will say, CEO gets up and says, so we got this new product called 737 MAX. It's going to help us catch up to Airbus. FAA's approved it. So we're going to go ahead and send it to market. Does that make sense? Number of mistakes. Number one, talking first. Number two, expressing what you think. Number three, does that make sense? Why do we ask the question? It's binary and it's self-affirming. It induces head nodding, mindless agreement. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yes, boss. Greatest thing I ever heard. It does not induce, hey, no, boss, I think you have your head up your butt. It makes no sense. I don't understand. So we have to ask the question differently. We have to say, what doesn't make sense? Or how could this be wrong? Don't say what doesn't make sense to you, because then you're basically implying the person's an idiot. That's really not the way to go either. But like what could be wrong? How could this picture be wrong if you go down this path? Because you have to make it easier for people to speak up and say speak their mind. Otherwise, you're just great. You're right. Everything's great. And then you're wrong. And the company goes bankrupt or people die.
It makes sense to me that with this explanation that you were a math and science geek when you were younger, and language is math, or math is language, or whatever. And science is a thing of, if it doesn't work, try, set up an experiment and try it again.
Yeah.
And that I may read your book again. so because it casts a different light on the whole thing, and that's what you're doing. Because I was going to ask you, so what made you so weird and so different and blah, 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 but I'm getting it. It's like you've been carrying this for a long time, and finally you get your chance to express it, not through yourself, but through a bunch of people.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Matt. And I personally hate the phrase "quote soft skills" because there's really, to me, nothing soft about them and the language. And so one of the things you can do with language, since it's expressed, is you can measure it. So I can measure, for example, I can scan the emails that a company sends. I can measure how many times question marks are sent from subordinates to bosses, and I can measure how many times question marks are sent from bosses back to subordinates. And that tells us something. I'm just measuring things. When we did research for this book, Leadership as Language, we were looking for patterns of resilient versus fragile teams. And so along the lines of being a math major, we would take transcripts. People in my mind, don't appreciate the details and they'll just say, well, give me a summary of the meeting. Yeah, you're missing a lot. So we would take a transcript of a meeting of a team that would make a mistake. Now, of course, they didn't know that they were going to make a mistake while they were in the meeting. They were just talking about a decision. Should we continue on course? Should we land the airplane? Should we launch these kind of things? So we were looking at things that we had transcripts of. And the first thing that we did with my team was I just said, count the words. I don't care, long word, short word, adjective, noun, whatever. I don't care. I just want to count the number of words people say. And then so we lined up counting the number of words against the hierarchy. And you know what was eerie? When it came to the teams that made mistakes, those two lines were identical. The most senior person said the most number of words, the second senior person said the second most number of words, all the way down. And so if someone said if you said, here's 5 people in the meeting, this person said 1% of the words, I'd say, I predict that person is the most junior person in the meeting. And guess what? That'd be correct.
Of course.
So if you want to make a more resilient team, what you need to do is level that share of voice. So if you're the senior person, talk less and make it easier for the junior people to speak up more. Now, that seems pretty easy, but it runs against everything that we do. But it will make you make better decisions. Why? It makes sense. It's because you'll now know what everybody knows. You see what everybody sees, not just what a few loud people see and want to share. So that was the kind of stuff that we did. And I think language is super powerful because not only is it's manifesting our internal beliefs, but by changing our language, we can change our internal beliefs. The language rewires our brains, not the other way around.
Or the other way around, but it's a feedback loop, right?
It's a recursive, feedback loop. Yes, exactly, right.
So if I start speaking differently, I start thinking differently. If I start thinking differently, I can start speaking differently, and it just keeps improving.
Right. So one of the fun things, like our thing with no they on Santa Fe, we outlawed the word they. So you had to say the word we. Anyway, it changes. Like if you think someone is not in your tribe or not on your team, you call them a they. But if you think they're in your tribe, you call them a we. Well, we did this. But if you start calling someone we, your brain will then eventually say, well, I must be in my tribe because we're using the word we for that person. Therefore, the synapses will grow and make the connection so that it then feels like we.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah, and the worst offender of all this, the people that like to talk in terms of I decided this, I'm going to do that. And what it really means is you all are going to do this, you all are going to do that. And it's poison. It really is poison.
Yeah, I think, I'm so with you. I think like we say, so should we put the sign out front? Yeah, we should. And then everyone just sits there. Well, if you mean we, then say we. But if you're not planning on going back to the garage and picking up the sign and start to help carry it out front, don't use the word we. You say you. You're going to, I need you to take the sign off. I just think all these things add, the way I think about it is friction. It's like grit in the machine. So now I have to spend it might be a really small amount, but some percent of my brain trying to figure out, now, is that really we, or is that just the fake we, or is that the fake I? And hey, it's a very competitive world. You're going to like throw away parts of your brain power on stuff you don't need to? No, be very specific and precise. Be precise in the language.
So is that what the book is about? The precision and the title is Reclaiming Verbal Agility. So what's the...
Yeah, so that's like a sub theme. The main thing is, here's number one main thing. You are not choosing your words. Your words were chosen to you by someone who designed a factory 100, 200 years ago and got people to talk in a certain way. What was that? Their bosses, there's followers. There's white collar, blue collar, leaders, followers, management, worker, whatever it is. Okay, and those words are embedded in your speech patterns. Asking binary questions. Will that work? Is it safe? Right? We good? All these things are manifestations of this industrial world, which is a fundamentally coercive management structure. Why? Because the people who make the decisions aren't doing the thing. The people doing the thing are not making the decision. So it's a world where one group decides what a different group is supposed to do in life. That has to be coercive. Now, we don't use the word because we're not honest. We'll say, exactly. Oh, no, we inspire people to do what I want them to do. Well, that's coercion. So we're not deliberate about it. We're just inherited that word. Now, I talk to leaders, and I'll ask them a question. I'll say, hey, in your group, so I'm working with an oil company. And I say, hey, I want you to predict what the price of oil is going to be on December 31st this year. And I said, and you have 60 seconds and the whole table has to agree. And I got like, say, 5 tables of 5 executives. Ready, go. And as soon as I say go, what happens? Someone who thinks they know the answer says, well, I think it's going to be this. And then other people say, well, no, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And then what happens? The group ends up very close to the initial estimate. And if that initial estimate was from the boss, maybe exactly on it. And then I say, well, how come you ran the meeting that way? Like, well, what do you mean? Well, why did you do that where one person talked first and then other people had to sort of pile on and change or agree? And who let that person talk first? They don't even think about it.
No.
It's mindless. It's like, well, is there another way? Yeah, there's a much better way. We call it vote first, then discuss. So everyone takes a card and writes it down. Now 5 people simultaneously slide out a card. Now I got 5 real opinions, not 5 people just buttering up the boss. Anyway, there's lots of little things like this. So these patterns of speech, which we just mindlessly do because we inherited from the industrial age, and people are not thinking about it, and they're not achieving what they want in life. They're not achieving cognitive variability.
Yeah, what you call in the industrial age or the industrial practice or whatever is part of what we call fiat. Fiat meaning because I said so, and it's the system that we live in. It's all around us. There's no escaping it, as it is. And a lot of people get close to the edge of it, but then they go, oh, that's the edge, let me go the other way. And they don't ever confront that. Radical, as much as it is going to the root of things, we discovered that it was an alternative system to fiat. Is instead of coercion or force, as we call it, how about doing things, collaborate and do things out of love and do things more collaborative, more, let what you were saying about leveling up the system and stuff like that. That's all helping people express themselves in whatever ways it takes. So the radical model, the radical foundation, as we call it, is very simple, and it helps in getting away from fiat. One important part of the fiat system is ownership. Ownership is centralized, right? I own the company, you don't, and you meaning a bunch of people. Our company got to be, well, it's still around. It's more people now, but it got to be 800 people, and I own a third of the company, and my partner owned a third of the company, but nobody else. I mean, people did have small parts and stuff, but they didn't own it. They weren't the, when you walk through your house, you're the owner of the house, right? You move a glass from here to there and all that stuff, and people didn't quite feel that way, even though in some areas they can make their own decisions and stuff like that, but they didn't quite feel that way. And what we're saying is we got to get away from fiat and more to a radical foundation like model. And so ownership is a big part of it. In the case of submarines and things like that, the owner is the U.S. government, and there's no fighting that for now. But in businesses, which is what we're focused on, and people, which is what we're focused on as well, ownership is something that you potentially can own, and you can have co-ownership of the business or ownership of your own thoughts. The problem is people don't know. People are trained away from owning their own decisions. And like you said, if the guy says yellow, you say, oh, yeah, it looks like yellow, even though it's blue. Yeah, it looks like yellow. And so that's the distinction going forward. But like I said, I think what you did was what you're doing now. The example you said with the cards, we had the interviewing system. There was no commanding voice that could say, "Oh no, this guy is an idiot," and off we go. It's everybody decided who the person was, and normally we would go, "What do you think? What do you think?" Well, the first number had a huge influence on the second number and third number. So we went to the cards business, although we did online. But when everybody had entered a number, everybody saw their numbers. And you saw, in the case of somebody really good, you saw a lot of fours, and but you would see a one. And we focus on that and go, why one? Well, because blah, 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 blah. And oftentimes that person would point out things that the rest of us have not caught on to. So that's a good system of having, what's it called? Something poker, but the whole idea is that you don't disclose your cards until the very end.
We said vote first, then discuss. Don't discuss, then vote.
Yeah, yes.
We do fist of five, and we do cards and probability cards and things like that.
One of the things that you mentioned, David, earlier was, the human nature part and how people have these needs that you described. They need to know what's going on. They need to be able to have autonomy. They need to have be able to think. Two of those things that we think are really critically important are meaning and belonging. So the belonging really is speaking to your we, right? I'm not only not part of that team, but I'm very often alone within my team. I don't feel like I'm part of the team. And so in our organizations, when I say ours, I mean the typical organization around the world today, people feel disconnected from their colleagues. They walk in, they do their work, they walk away, and they are not feeling like a we. And the other is the meaning. So you tell me what to do. I don't understand it. My brain just goes, okay, I'll just do what you tell me to do. But
Right.
I feel a sense of, well, I don't understand. And that makes me feel disengaged from the work that I'm doing. And so I end up just going through the motions, which is, according to a lot of the statistics we see, I'm sure you know the same statistics we do, 70 to 80% of the people are disengaged in their workplace. And that has to do with that reality of both not having adequate meaning or belonging within that workplace.
Yes.
Does that align with what you saw?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think so. So now I'm having discussions with my co-founder about, well, how do we spread the ownership in the company? And because on the Submarine, I didn't have to deal with things
Right.
like equity and shares and that kind of stuff, which was, in a sense, it made it easier. In a sense, it made it harder. So how do you get people to feel a sense of ownership? Well, we did it through language and agency. For me, it was like the more decision-making authority I give you, the more you're going to feel a sense of ownership over those decisions. You're not going to feel a sense of ownership over a decision that I make and then tell you to implement. It's like no matter, there's going to be no amount of ping pong tables in foosball games that are going to really compensate for that. So step one to engagement is always give people more agency. Step two is repeat step one until uncomfortable, and then do it a little bit more. So one of the things we like to get our CEOs and executive teams doing is not ordering when they go to a restaurant. See if you can get the server to choose your meal. You don't even know what it's going to be until they put it in front of you. When you get that right at a restaurant, now you've earned the right to go to work and lead a team. If you can't get a server to choose for you, you can't delegate a decision to a server to pick something as safe as what your dinner's going to be, you're probably going to have a really hard time at work and letting the team make decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. In the Submarine, you weren't the owner of the submarine. You couldn't be fired for whatever reason. So you weren't the actual owner, but you had the agency, and what you did is share that with everybody. By the way, you used twice now, you used the word leader. And it's a pet peeve of mine. We call them bosses, okay? Because leader is somebody that I follow. And there's lots of leadership around. It's dynamic and it changes all the time and all that. But if I have to follow somebody, he's not my leader. I have to follow him for my salary and all that other stuff. So one of the things that we take particular aim at is what we call fiat hierarchy, which is this business of somebody's a boss, somebody's not. And and I just wanted to make the decision.
It sounds like your term leadership is, or your use of the term leadership is more around an existing structure in an organization.
Well, when we say I want people to act like leaders, it means I want them to think, express their honest thinking, not what they think they should be doing, take initiative and take ownership for their decisions, and align their decisions to what's best for the organization, not what's best for them personally. So when we get that going, then I say, yeah, we're building leaders at every level.
So there's leaders top to bottom.
Yeah, as opposed to leaders and followers. Yeah,
Right,
followers
right.
to me means, in a way, it's a play on words because we're all, in a sense, following the mission and the principles of the organization. But what happens is, instead of following the mission of the organization, I end up following Jack, or it becomes not a what, but a who, not a principle, but a person. And that's where you get into trouble. Like I follow, like the mission and vision of Volkswagen was not to create a diesel cheat. The mission and vision of Volkswagen was to, they were running ads on environmental making, changing the world environmentally and making the greenest cars possible. But that will always fail when you put in competition. Well, my boss says I have to do this. So now instead of following the mission, I'm now following Winterkorn, who's the CEO.
Yes.
And so the principle gets corrupted and usurped by the person. And so we end up with a system which is basically feudalism.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I got to announce next week's guest, Greg Harmeyer, CEO of Tier 1 Impact. And Greg is the co-founder and CEO of Tier 1, which he spelled with a lowercase I. And he's completely owned by the employees with an ESOP. So I had the chance of having a conversation with him and stuff like that beforehand, and I think he's going to make a great guest. He's got very different ideas, some of which I don't agree with, but that's where the juice is.
That's part of the game.
Is that friction of the two. So with that, if you guys have anything to say.
I was just wondering if David has something else to impart. I really loved what he had to share to us, especially the language part. So I look forward to reading the book. If you could pick it up one more time, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. No, that's great. Yeah, so you start with Turn the Ship Around, which is sort of the story of what happened on the submarine, and then the analysis of the language and the understanding what patterns that we've inherited, these fiat patterns, and how we want to, quote, radicalize them, comes from stories are coming out of Leadership as Language.
Awesome.
So thanks to all the listeners for tuning in and participating.
Yeah, thank you for showing up and having a great story to tell. Have a good one.